Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today for Hacking HR's The Soft in Hard Times, how to keep kindness, compassion, and empathy as priorities during times of adversity and challenge at work. I am your moderator, Lauren Lefkowitz. I'm an executive coach with Fine as a Trap Coaching. And I have 20 years of HR experience in retail, nonprofit, and finance. And so excited to be here today talking about this. I love the blend of soft and hard. And we'll talk about that a bunch today. In a moment, I'm going to invite the panel to join me. But before I do, I want to encourage you to be active in the comments section today. Ask questions. We have some questions prepared, but ask questions, comment. We love to bring you into the conversation as much as we can. And I also encourage you to connect with each other, connect with the speakers, the panelists, because connection brings connection. So if you're building your network here on LinkedIn, this is a great opportunity to do that. So now I'd love to invite the panel to join me so that we can get started and get some introductions going. Welcome, panel. So glad to have you all here. Panelists, I'll ask you to stay muted until you unmute to talk, so that helps us avoid any background noise. Super happy to have you here. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself just in the order I see you on the screen. So Susan, followed by Jamie, followed by Jessica, followed by also Jamie Conrad. And so let's just get started with introductions. Who are you? Where are you working? What is your HR experience?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lauren. I'm super happy to be here. My name's Susan Elligan-Jackson. I'm the Global Head of People Operations here at Pegasystems. I have been in HR for goodness, close to 12 years now, 13, going on 13. And I am based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So thanks for having me on today's panel.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Getgood, and yes, that last name is real. I'll get that off my chest. I am the Chief People Officer for a group of companies, but the main brand is called ARMI, A-R-M-I, and we are a digital marketing business that works with companies globally. And I'm based in California.
Hi, I'm Jessica Baum. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and author, and I run 2 group practices. I don't have experience in HR, but I'm sure I have a lot to say around the topic from my lens.
Hi, I'm Jamie Conrad. I'm the VP of People and HR at Trust Radius. We're a B2B SaaS company based out of Austin, Texas, in the Austin, Texas metro area. Have about 15 years of HR experience, both in healthcare and in the tech sector. And this is a really important topic for me personally and professionally, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. And our final panelist has joined us. Welcome. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to have made it through the tech gauntlet. My name is Sherry Chernak, and I am also based in Austin, Texas. And I am a senior principal in Mercer's transformation practice at the intersection of people and transformation. Great to be here.
Amazing. What an amazing panel we have today. And I'm so excited to talk about this topic. I know that our business world, our corporate worlds, or our healthcare worlds, or our nonprofit worlds, wherever we're working, there's so much busy. There's so much to do. There's so much to focus on: numbers, metrics, all different kinds of measurements of success. So I would love to start with just sort of the broad concept of why the soft is even important. And panelists, as you're getting ready to share, just come off of mute and pay attention to each other's mute buttons. And that'll make sure that we're not interrupting each other and we all have an opportunity to answer. So why is the soft important?
I'm happy to start. We bring our whole selves to work, and in order to focus on the so-called hard stuff, the performance, the delivery for our customers and our colleagues and so forth, we have to be in an environment in which we feel comfortable and capable of delivering our best. And often it's a lot of those soft elements: leadership, culture, how we treat one another, our working norms and behaviors that really influence whether people feel empowered and enabled to do the work that is expected of them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Sherry's saying. I was on a previous panel, and I wish I could remember who said it, but they said soft skills are the power skills, and I've embraced it and ran with it, and have tried to advocate for that mindset ever since I heard it. Because I think it's critical to how we think about when we're interacting with each other, that those are the power skills that make the performance conversations easier to have, especially in the moment. And anything that we can do to help promote those soft skills being seen as power skills, I think makes us more effective when we get into team dynamics.
I think I would just add it fosters a sense of trust quite quickly too, right? So when we think about belonging and inclusion and how do we build that collaboration, that trust across our teams, it's really an important and critical ingredient rather, to the recipe of just an employee feeling like they belong in the workplace.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Jamie. I'll go after you.
Yeah, look, I just want to little mirror what Susan was saying. I truly believe when people knock off their alarm clock in the morning, they don't sit in bed worrying about the technical part of their role. They worry about the relationships and, do they have trust in their workplace and they feel valued. It's those soft skills that build that empathetic environment, that trust, that psychological safety. And we all know that that's where the true performance comes in.
And I would add, from studying interpersonal neurobiology, that the most important thing that we need as human is safety. And when we have a level of safety and trust in the people and in the culture that we're in, we thrive and we are able to access more creativity. We're able to bring our better selves. And so if we don't have a sense of safety, whether real or imagined, we can't build that trust, and that, that culture can't be. So we're more in our left hemisphere where we're competing with each other. We're getting things done, but it's not a culture where we're thriving together and there's no we, it's just an I culture. So it's really important to have these soft things highlighted and worked on, because you really do build cohesiveness in your group, and the neurobiology supports that. And I can talk about that, but I won't talk more about that.
Wonderful. Thank you for all of that input. Building trust, bringing our whole selves to work, whether we want to or not. We wake up in the morning and our whole self is part of us, right? And I think a lot of times in the workplace, there's this sense that we need to compartmentalize, leave our home stuff at home, leave our problems at home and just come in and do the work. In short sprints, that works, right? Sometimes there are these just really heavy times where you're in crisis or super fast mode. But on the whole, when there is a lack of empathy, when there is a lack of the use of soft skills, when there is a lack of compassion, we run into roadblocks. So I'd love to hear from all of you. How do we factor in the changes that need to happen when there is less time for the power skills, the soft skills, and also make sure we're still taking care of ourselves and each other?
I think it's something that we have to require of all leaders and model as leaders. And it's very important for people to see the kinds of behaviors that we're talking about and encouraging in the workplace: empathy, compassion, uh, uh, trust building. And these are not skills that everybody inherently has. And even those of us who have them in life may not instinctively know how they translate in the workplace. So, just like some of the skills that are associated with other elements of our jobs or other elements of leadership and accountability, this is something that needs to be taught in many cases. And I also think that the workplace has changed. So the expectations that many leaders had coming in based on how they were led, these are not necessarily areas that were being prioritized at certain points in our work lives, especially if we are um, a little bit further ahead in our careers and started out a few years or a few decades before some of the newer entrants to the workforce. So there's also that element of change that needs to be accounted for.
Yeah, and I think you said a really cool word there, Shari, which was prioritize. Um, and I think at the end of the day, if we really want to value our people and build in those principles, we have to, as a leadership team, build in the time, where even if there is no time, to make that happen. And I know I used to head the HR team for manufacturing for General Motors in Australia. And despite being a manufacturing operation and time is never there, we built in 30 minutes a day where leaders would walk the floor and build relationships. We built in time to build soft skills and behavioral skills with all of our leaders every month. And it was just a priority. So you have to build it in and not use the excuse we don't have time, because that activity alone will gain time based on better performance and everything else that you gain from that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have that proactive mindset and go at it when you don't wait for the crisis to happen before you start worrying about soft skills and empathy and compassion in the workplace. You build it into the culture and the daily interactions. You build it into the communication strategy. So having having an approach that allows for it to be involved in so many of your conversations, your team dynamics, starting off with, be present and deep breaths and, some of those well-being areas that can be really helpful. And I think it also allows for, when we think about how do we take care of ourselves along the way, it also helps make our jobs as HR professionals more impactful, easier to influence, and it builds our confidence, right? And so when we know that it's part of the culture already, or some of that language is already embedded in the culture, then when we go to have those conversations, we feel more confident coming to the table. And that can help ease our own anxieties and our own frustrations and how we approach some of those situations.
And I also think, like, as a leader, and
I think just to build a little bit.
Oh, sorry, I'll let you go first. That's fine.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to add on to what Jamie said. Apologies, my audio is a little lagged. Even when we think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like at the very bottom of that pyramid, it's physiological needs, but then shortly above that, it's the safety and security and the sense of belonging and love. And, it needs to be organic. It's a necessity. It's not a nice to have, right? So even if we just think about tried and true, concepts such as Maslow's, it's really there. Sorry, Jessica.
No, I mean, so I was just going to piggyback off of like vulnerability, trust, and safety, and those being really important. Also, as a leader, I think that leaders that share a little bit of vulnerability show that they show the staff or the employee that, like, we're all humans and we go through things, and we're a system. So if one person is going through something, the system picks up. If there's that collective feeling of we are a team, and that culture is there, and that sense of safety is there, and there's a little bit of vulnerability that, like, hey, something's going on in someone's life, and that happens in every system. And how do we collectively support that person, right? And know that we're not machines. We're just not machines. And when we can come from it from that lens, I think people can thrive, knowing that, like, they're not going to wake up every day and be the same person every day. And that's okay.
Those were the kindest set of answers to say, no, Lauren, we can't just skip empathy and compassion. So thank you for, I think the collective understanding, especially from HR professionals, is, of course, we need to integrate empathy and compassion and kindness. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about kindness in particular soon, but it's very easy for us to sit here and say, like, of course you have to have empathy. Of course you have to have compassion. And it's typically pretty easy for HR people to integrate that for themselves. But if you're in an HR position and you need to get management on board, you need to get the people you're working with on board with not just going through their day, going after the strategic goals that are more metrics oriented. Let's talk a little bit about the doing. If we're working with our leadership to get them to do more of the doing in integrating empathy, kindness, and compassion, how do we train them to do that? Or how do we course correct if we already see that not happening?
I can give you a really good example from General Motors. When I joined, the business was not performing in Australia and the leadership team was very command and control. I got abused in my first week by an executive. And really what we ended up doing was I had a very hard conversation with our head of Australia and basically said we needed to change. And we retrained every leader in our business some of those behavioral principles. And as simple as, how do you meet someone in the morning? How do you smile when you greet them? How do you handshake? Right down to them building in time. I made it mandatory that they must spend 30 minutes a day just meeting people and talking. We did a whole heap of coaching and mentoring and so forth, but it took a really conscious, direct effort, coaching them how to be what they need to be, but then also monitoring that and supporting them. And I think from there, short disclaimer, 18 months later, our business went from bottom quartile to top 10 plants in the world. So it works.
I think taking an objective approach to those problems is really important too, right? So whether it's a pulse survey or some type of data, so senior leaders at the top of the house can see, like, look, these are our gaps, these are our opportunities. I think it's much easier to lead with facts than feeling, especially as we're talking about feelings and empathy and being kind and being soft in the workplace. And, I think those pulse surveys do a heap of good whenever we're dealing with internal cultural challenges or opportunities that we might have.
I think as HR leaders, it also is incumbent upon us to make sure that we bring in and reward and recognize people who demonstrate the behaviors that we want to perpetuate across the organization. So it's everything from making sure that in an interview process, we don't simply interview for hard skills, but we also interview for the kind of leadership attributes that we're talking about. And then also, and especially this comes up in a performance management and succession context. We can't reward brilliant jerks for strong performance on the what and terrible performance on the how.
Yeah, I agree with Sherry for sure, especially when it comes to the interviewing process. I think it's important to go through an exercise where you know what those competencies are that you want to see, right? On your leadership team, as a management team, and all the way through your organization, what are those behavioral competencies that are important for the culture that you're trying to drive? And then build that into the hiring practice and the interviewing practice so that you know who you're bringing in and what kind of skills that they have. And then also continuing on with the proactive theme, I like to role play with my mid-level managers, specifically around real world examples, things that I've encountered in my career, not necessarily their coworkers in the moment, but when you start to build up a lot of these experiences, you've got some really good bad examples of situations, and you can use those to help drive a conversation, and get their buy-in. Oh yeah, if you're on the receiving that, or if I'm on the receiving end of that, I would never want somebody to feel that way, right? And you can go through some of those conversations from real world experiences, and then the impact that can have on the emotional response.
Yeah. And Jessica, I know we lost you for a moment, and you're so glad you're back. But do you want to contribute anything to the doing part on training leadership to integrate empathy, compassion, and kindness, or course correct when we don't see it in action?
Well, yeah, I mean, empathy and compassion are different. I'll just say that, but having compassion is so important in these settings, and it's also a skill. And it's a skill that some people don't have. So, spending the time with people and kind of giving them a place to work on those skills is really important. And I don't know, I missed a little bit of the dialogue there, so I don't have like too much to say in course correcting, but I like what Jamie said, like kind of doing these real life examples and helping people just develop more of these interpersonal skills is really important to have, like that culture that we're all striving for.
Thank you. So you, Jessica, you just brought up a really good point, that there is a difference between compassion and empathy. There's a difference actually also between kind and nice. So I'd love to hear from all of you. How do you discern the difference between nice and kind, the difference between compassion and empathy, as you're talking to managers who maybe tell you, look, I don't have time to be nice. I just need them to get the work done. Or I don't have time for compassion. This has to happen. If this person has too much going on in their personal life, then maybe they should leave, right? I mean, who hasn't heard a reaction like that from somebody who feels too busy to get in? So I'd love to hear some distinctions about these terms that we're using: compassion, empathy, kindness versus niceness.
I can speak. Oh, I was going to say, I can speak on the difference between compassion and empathy. This is a big one for me because I'm a psychotherapist, and we have to have empathy. But the thing is that empathy is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, and that can be emotionally draining, and it's definitely a positive in our world, and we want to be able to do that. But compassion is seeing another person in their world and having a sense of sympathy or a feeling for them. So you're not quite in their shoes. And so if I'm doing therapy, and to be completely honest, in many years I had a lot of empathy, and I have a lot of empathy, but I had to switch to a place of compassion where I saw my clients going through what they were going through in their shoes rather than me going through the experience. And actually that's a healthier approach to understanding clients or people that you're working with, is like, don't put yourself completely in their shoes, see them in this situation, build sympathy, build an understanding for what they're going through, but don't step all the way into that role, because then I think we can overcompensate, we can lose our boundary system. And so it's important to know the difference between compassion and empathy, especially in my field, but I imagine in every field.
Yeah, and for me, if we look at the difference between nice and kindness, I think being nice is short term, it's surface level. It's, I walk past and say hi, and maybe I avoid difficult conversations, but it's really a short term, I'm making you feel good. Where kindness is that deeper level. I think that's all about understanding the intrinsic motivation of your employees. It has a long-term view. It's having courageous conversations. And I think it helps foster relationship and understanding and trust. And I think that's the main difference for me. It has that growth mindset view. It's looking at, how do I build you as an employee and show you that longer term compassion, versus I'm just going to be nice and say hello when I walk in the door. That's for me the difference.
I think to add, an important distinction for me is Nice is comfortable. Kindness, typically, if you're sincere and you're demonstrating that sincerity, it can be uncomfortable. And so that distinction and demonstrating kindness typically reaps a larger benefit than just being nice.
I tend to slice the salami a little bit differently, just because I think for a lot of people, especially who are not used to discussing some of these topics, I think the distinctions can feel a bit vague, or maybe even uncomfortable. So when that happens, I like to define the behavior that we are looking for, and the behavior that is not okay. So, is there something around, demonstrating care for the whole person? People can begin to understand what that means. And then I think the other way, where people say if they don't have time or they don't know what it looks like, you, the leader, are one person in an organization who is responsible for this. You are the closest to this person, so you have a role to play. But then it's also emphasizing reliance on others if it is not like you can't, if you can't be kind, if you can't relate to somebody in a way that is appropriate to what they're going through, that you have the right, but that you do have the opportunity to also reach out, get coaching, ask for help, bring somebody else into the conversation as well.
Terrific. Thank you. So I think we've well established that the soft side is required. Let's talk about the short and long-term impacts of integrating the soft into hard times, right? So we're here to talk a little bit about the how, right? We've talked about the why, but before we get into more how, which is what we'll get into next, let's talk about the short and long-term impacts of integrating these factors: compassion, empathy, kindness, into hard times. I would love if you can integrate a story of success that you've had during your careers into your answer.
I'm happy to continue on from what I said before. When we were able to turn the GM business in Australia, we were a bottom performer. Our absenteeism was terrible, our quality was terrible, our performance was terrible. By putting such a focus on this topic and leadership and compassion and people-focused approach, we saw every metric in our business turn. Our absenteeism was 9 to 10% in a manufacturing environment. That dropped to 3. Our workers' compensation went from something like 150 open claims to 30. Our quality metrics went up 15%. Our productivity went up 20%. Our engagement surveys went up ridiculous in some areas like trust, 40%. And it all came down to some of those principles we're talking about, building the soft skills in our leaders, but also not tolerating those leaders that weren't coming on the journey, or employees. So we sometimes think being nice is always warm and fuzzy and we do all the fun stuff. It's about holding people accountable, but also doing it with the right level of compassion and people focus.
I think just to add to, COVID presented countless opportunities to build the soft during hard times, and especially global organizations. And just to provide an example, historically we had a region that was a little, maybe disengaged isn't the word, but it was a transaction-based team based offshore. And so they really weren't fully integrated into a global model. And when COVID hit, this particular region was really, really stretched in terms of folks out ill, or, people really dealing with some very, very harsh times across their families. And, from a leadership perspective, we really had to think about the way that we wanted to approach it. And the fruits of the way that we handled those situations ended up in, more team engagement, a more holistic team building approach to the way that we solve problems. The outcome was a greater employee experience, right? Because we were very, very well aligned in terms of the way that we managed processes and delivered service. And so I think COVID was a great example for lots of organizations where they really needed to step up to the plate.
And I can piggyback off of that. If you look at like social baseline theory and what the science says, when we're in it together and we feel like we really truly are supporting each other, we can get through stress easier. And that goes for a whole company. So if we can form this soft approach and the system approach, when crisis happens, the system technically can come together stronger. And if the system doesn't have this soft approach, it can actually cause chaos and divide the system. So the stronger the qualities of having compassion and understanding and systems in place to really understand that we're all maybe in this crisis together and those qualities are there, you'll very much see the system go one way or the other, depending on how supported one feels in that system. So it's so important, especially when we are constantly in crisis and we don't know when crisis is going to come up. And I think the systems that did well during COVID were the ones that were sensitive, that everybody was kind of going through their own kind of crisis together and that we needed each other.
One of the best examples that I feel like I've experienced in my profession around this topic was during COVID and being in the hospital setting and watching the different CEOs. I was fortunate enough to be in a role where I was supporting multiple hospitals led by multiple hospital CEOs, and the differences in leadership and the impact that those differences had on patient outcomes, employee retention, some of the employee engagement and job satisfaction. Imagine the mass chaos in the hospitals during those times. And it was truly the soft skills in the leadership qualities, and then the accountability of those competencies and those soft skills, not just by the CEO, but how they also reacted when their leadership teams weren't exhibiting the skills needed to be successful, and the employees, how they saw that and reacted to it. One of those CEOs, I would imagine that no matter where he goes, he's always going to have a full staff and people following him and knocking down the door to work for him, because he leaned into empathy, compassion, kindness, and worked with his team in the trenches with his team and held his team accountable for those competencies throughout the entire first few months of COVID, when there just wasn't anyone else to turn to. And I think he's got a crew for life, and I commend that. And so that was a really great experience to be a part of. And I think it just speaks to what we're talking about here.
Thank you so much. I would like to go work for him. We have a comment in the chat, and if you're with us, if you joined us a little bit late, we are paying attention to the comment section. So if you have questions or comments to add, please bring them in. We'll try to bring them into the conversation. But this comment came in from Pat. I've been in HR while part of a manufacturing plant. Going to the people means much more to the employees. They don't have enough time during a break to run to an office, talk for a minute, and then run back to the job. So as an HR leader or as a leader in your organization, if you are an HR person helping leaders in your organization find small ways to integrate these softer sides into their daily lives, their daily work lives, what are some small ways to start integrating this so that it doesn't feel like a huge overhaul? As you're sort of building the big strategy, how do you build the small strategies?
I can maybe touch on what I said before, which probably led to this comment. In our manufacturing facilities, what we used to do was I used to enforce 30 minutes a day where the leaders had to just spend with people. And that meant sometimes people were actually physically taken offline to talk. And the instruction was to not talk about work. So we wanted them to know about their lives and their scenario. What's your dog name? What football team do you support? And when it was their birthday, actually take them to the lunch area and have a donut and a coffee with them. And I used to get complaints all the time from manufacturing saying, but you're going to stop our line. But the end result was productivity improved. And probably the real win was we had some employees that were dealing with some horrendous things at home that we didn't know about, and they didn't trust us to tell us. And by building this, within a month or two, we started hearing all these stories. We then added little levels of support on their journey, and all of a sudden their performance turned. And so for me, it was building in time every single day that made a big difference. And there's 1,000 other ideas, but I don't want to steal all the time.
I think that, I once coached an executive who I would say was more of a numbers person than a people person. And he became the CEO. And I encouraged him to do small things like reach out to 5 people in whatever location he was in, and spend a couple of impromptu minutes with them to thank people for their contributions. And as a member of the HR team, I shared some recommendations on and some stories and vignettes. And then when things are hard, I think it's also helpful. Individuals might not be on leaders' radar screens unless they are informed. But when those leaders know that something is going on, to reach out and on a personal level as much as on a corporate level, what can we do to help as a company? But even thinking back to the last question, after I had experienced the loss of a parent, I got a note at 11:30 p.m. I was a consultant, we were both working, and it was from a very senior partner, just saying, how are you? And it was long after all of the kind of the formal helping me get through the grief process activities had concluded. It was just a very human activity. So just reminding people, leaders are people too, how to relate to people on a just regular, micro interaction basis, with gratitude, with curiosity, and with interest in people's well-being.
Yeah, I can echo that. I mean, I don't know that this would work in a very large corporation, and I do a lot of couples counseling, but there's science around appreciation. And so when we can appreciate something small that someone else does for us, it really, really takes down our defenses. And I would say for the leader, but really within the employees too. So like sometimes if you're running a staff meeting, and I've done it in my staff meetings and others, and everybody does an appreciation, or there's an appreciation email that goes out. What it does is it says, oh, Susan, that cup of coffee you brought me, or thank you for picking up the slack here, or something very small that Susan might have done for me. If I recognize it in her, it's going to reinforce her wanting to do that again. And it builds that sense of community and culture that we've been talking about. So I think it sounds cheesy, but like having an appreciation policy or an appreciation kind of ritual really lowers our defenses, gets us out of complaining all the time, and moves us into a place of like, oh, well, these little things that we can do for each other deeply, deeply impact each other.
Just to build 2 really quick things from Jessica and Sherry. Gratitude Corner is something that we've implemented in our leadership team connects. We take 30 seconds every week or every 2 weeks to say, all right, let's show some gratitude to one another. What happened in the past 2 weeks that you want to call out your colleague for, right? And it's pretty fascinating to hear some of the things where you wouldn't think twice. You wouldn't think twice in someone showing gratitude. So that's been really, really impactful, and it's small and it's quick. The other thing is, I think just actively listening. There's so much power in listening. It's unbelievable. I have someone on my team who remembers, and not to say that everybody can remember everything, especially in large, global, complex organizations, but even just tying back to something someone is connected to. Hey, Sherry, I'm checking in. I know you said, your son was going for tryouts a few weeks ago. How did it turn out? Like just the simplest things. There's so much power in listening. And I think sometimes we take it for granted.
One of the things that we've implemented is just a really simple Google form for managers to use. So whenever there is a life event or a situation that's happening, or with an employee that they want the organization to consider doing something a little bit more, they'll fill out this quick Google form, takes them 2 minutes, and it informs us of what's happening in employees' lives, so that we can either reach out, we can provide support, we can send them flowers and congratulations, whatever that looks like. So just, it's not a heavy lift, but it helps, the employees see that not only is their manager listening to them when they talk, but also they're working in an organization that is also listening and wants to be there in those times of need, or in those times of celebration, that their success is our success as well.
Thank you so much. Such great insights, and tiny things that we can do that don't take any time at all, that spark us to have gratitude and demonstrate kindness and be looking out for each other. I know for me, I had an accident a few years ago where I broke both of my shoulders and I was out of work for several months. And I have distinct memories of very fast, hope you feel better soon emails, and really in-depth, visits and texts and calls, and sort of everything in between. And I also remember the people who didn't do that, who sent me a message 2 months in saying, before you went out, did you do this? And when you have that polarity, when you have a group of people who are compassionate, the standout are the people who aren't, right? And then you can course correct sort of individually. But when we look at the bigger picture, we look at the broad strategy, and we touched on this a bit at the beginning of our conversation, so I want to come back into it and talk about, when you're an HR person on the team, when you're probably the person who is naturally more compassion oriented, and we're building the broad company strategy, the broad organizational strategy, how do you bring that into the conversation?
My HR strategy is rooted in our core values. So when we talk about being an employee-centric organization, it's taking each one of those core values and defining what that looks like, right? So if we're transparent, what does that mean in the employee experience? What does that mean from a business competencies? What does that mean from behavioral competencies? And so leaning into those things that are, I think part of our role in HR is to champion those core values. And what better way to do that than to define it and put some teeth behind it, and then communicate it in our actions as an organization. And so leaning into the core values as you build your strategy can also land a little bit easier when you're trying to roll out your ideas. Now, this is things that we've already agreed to. There's no debate that these are the 4 things, or these are the 6 things that represent us as a business when it comes to culture. And so HR strategy can just include that, and it helps to build the language. It also promotes that positive reinforcement that we're not just having core values on the wall, we're actually walking the talk in our actions.
Jamie, I would agree. Cultures and values is definitely key. I think success behaviors and what are examples of behaviors that are actually role modeling those success behaviors is really important as we, look at strategy and what the expectation is for each one of us too.
Yeah, I think you stole my answer, Susan, because that's pretty much where I was going to go. But I think also making sure that when you build in that as an organisation, build it into your strategy. I think sometimes we can have a HR strategy that's very driven around metrics and deliverables, and there's set metrics and targets, but we don't always build in those soft behavioural strategies into our strategy, if that makes sense. So call it out. we're going to do being humans training with all of our leaders, and then have an expectation that rolls through every leader in the business. But reward behaviors, not just outcomes. And I think that was a big learning for me. Sometimes we reward the person that gets the highest commission, but don't always reward the person that turns up every day with the right behaviors. So let's look at how we recognize and reward people in that strategy.
I think a lot of companies that are and organizations that are thinking about their future of work strategies, it's a great opportunity as well because working in remote and distributed environments requires a different type of leadership and provides an opportunity to clarify, to change, to raise the bar on expectations of leaders and also to develop them. We can't just put these demands out there. So thinking about what is the organization's commitment to leadership development, training, and coaching, I think this is a great time to do it because organizations are struggling with productivity and performance because we're not always in front of each other the way that we used to be. So it's to think about things from that lens as well, and hopefully to shake loose the investment required to make these things happen more quickly.
Yeah, I'm just echoing what Jamie said. I think that, rewarding behaviors that, aren't like, seen as success, but they're the behaviors that we want needs to be done more. And like basically everything that Jamie said is starting out, implementing these things from the get-go. And if you're not doing it, start it now with whatever that gratitude sharing is or spending time, but like getting that part of like, that's equally as part of everything else that we're doing in this corporation. And it's kind of something that you get used to because it's so easy to get out of touch with whatever you're implementing on these soft skills because they're not as valued or they're not as needed as much as like kind of the bottom dollar, but they're really, really, really valuable. So treating them as valuable as the other things that you're trying to implement would be helpful.
Show of hands here, and I'll be the first to raise mine. Who here has taken on more of the empathy, compassion load because they've seen leaders around them not doing it? So trying to compensate for other people's lack of. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that, right? As HR practitioners, we so often see holes in the softer side of things that we try to be the person who takes over for that in that capacity. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we avoid the empathy, compassion overload for ourselves?
I just finished a CHRO study that I'm about to release into the world with over 100 CHROs, and they are feeling both lonely and stressed. So especially as we get more senior, the number of people that we can talk to as HR leaders narrows. Heads of HR and other senior HR leaders are often also business partners to the leaders with whom they are peers. So that formalizes, in some cases, the peer relationship and limits the kind of casual interaction that would allow for dialogue about that. And then similarly, sharing things that could violate confidentiality is a challenge. So one of the things that we recommend is really that HR network, sometimes going outside of the organization to commune with people who are going through the same kinds of challenges, to strategize about how to deal with it, but also just to be there for one another as humans, to seek coaching support and and to really advocate for other leaders doing their share so that it is not one of many things that is perceived as an HR responsibility, but really is a leadership responsibility.
I can give you a practical, real example. I have had an empathy burnout. When we were succeeding in General Motors, we then had an announcement where we had to close manufacturing. The whole industry announced closure. So I then took the lead for not only the closure of General Motors, but I got involved with the Australian government's program because the whole supply chain closed. That was a 5-year program, and I got burnt out at the end. And really what I had to do at the end was a number of things. I had to start taking care of me. I had to have the right people in my camp and have people that were there to support and guide and direct me. I needed to have the right level of mindfulness. I had to really be open and honest with people around me, saying, I'm actually finding this really difficult now. And that meant setting boundaries as well. So I think there's a whole heap of things I had to do personally. And that also meant sometimes saying no, because I was so conditioned to taking the weight of this closure that I kept saying, yes, 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 I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you. And got to a point where I felt like I didn't help myself. So it really was a self-reflection point. I actually got some professional help. I did speak to a psychotherapist, and I was ashamed of that at first. And then I realized I shouldn't be. It's the best thing I did. So speaking to the right people, having the right friends and family and support network was so important.
Yeah, I think when it comes to setting healthy boundaries, it's not just about, start and stop times. It's also about how we approach. We don't shut it off at 5 o'clock, right? The mind keeps going. And so what are some of those small things, going back to that theme, that we can put in our daily work that prevent some of that? I also think leaning into your wellness checks from a mental health standpoint. You don't need to just go see a therapist or talk to somebody when it's a crisis situation or you've gotten to the point where you're burnout. There's an opportunity to have some of those wellness conversations too, to help you define what some of those boundaries for you personally can be. And if you know an HR professional, reach out to them, because there's a good chance that they're burnout. Recent study, 98% of HR professionals reported feeling burnout, and that's a real thing. And so when we think about the fact of where we're at as a profession, how do we continue on with those high-level strategic conversations? We don't want to lose momentum that we've gained over the last 3 years from that standpoint, but we have to be able to take time for ourselves as well. So exiting the profession, not the right answer if we can prevent it, right? So make sure we're putting those small things in on a wellness side and on a daily basis to keep us from getting there, and reach out to your colleagues regularly just to check in on them.
Yeah, I would, when I say that I piggyback off all of that, I mean, as a mental health professional, I also have gotten my own help and had burnout, but I think, taking on people's problems, and I think it was Sherry that mentioned like the group support. I think every time we hear someone's story or what someone's going through, it touches something inside of us too. And become really aware of like what part of their story is bringing up something inside of me. And often that can be, bring up our own work to bring to support, and knowing that both are true. So we can hold space for another person. They can be going through something traumatic. We want to help them. And what they're going through might also activate something deeply within us. And it's our job to kind of continue to explore what is it that's coming up in us and where are safe places that we can bring that to. And I think as a therapist, I encourage all therapists to do that, but I imagine HR people go through exactly the same thing, a similar thing that therapists go through.
Just without the actual therapist training. Jamie, sorry, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just one other thing that pops to mind to me is always reminding ourselves that we don't have to fix everything, right? We have a lot of problems or issues or challenges that come our way, but we're not responsible for fixing everything all the time, especially those things that are beyond our control or not within our sphere of influence. And so that can also help with some healthy boundaries. It's just that reminder of, this isn't my problem to own, I can influence, I can help, but it's not necessarily mine to take with and feel like the whole weight of it is on our shoulders all the time. So make sure that we're setting those boundaries on what we can influence, what is important, and how we prioritize that, I think is important to consider as well.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I want to kind of tie together a little bit of what all of you said, which is that as a profession, we're in burnout. We take on a lot to begin with, and then we add to it very often a feeling of personal responsibility for the psychological safety, the joy, the avoidance of company exposure, for, and all of these things. And, I said a little bit tongue in cheek, Jessica, we do we have the similar experience without the training, but that's also really important to remember that as HR professionals who are not trained therapists, we have to know what our boundary is. We have to know where our limitation is and where we recommend to somebody that they use the employee assistance program, that they use the mental health benefits, that they find resources, or that we offer them resources that we know of, because there is a limit to what we should be handling ethically and legally based on what is happening in our workplace. This has been such a brilliant discussion, and these always go so fast. We've got about 4 minutes left, so I would love to hear from each of you. What is like a quick point that you want to share, that you want to make sure that our audience walks away with today?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you do find yourself in a situation where you need the mental health assistance, or you're feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders, having compassion and empathy and kindness and embodying that in the organization, we have to show up and be the example. And so that starts with ourselves as well. So don't be afraid to ask for help.
I think I just add, I heard a quote once, I think it was from the CEO of Microsoft, and he said, ideas excite me, but empathy grounds and centers me. And it's such a simple quote, but it's a really profound statement. And I think it has leaps and bounds to how we drive culture in the workplace. And so I think if we can consider what he was really trying to say beneath the surface, it's pretty powerful.
The stigma around being human and needing help in the workplace is leaving. The expectations are being ratcheted up on us as leaders, but the opportunity to create the kind of workplace that we all want to live in and go to, literally or figuratively, is pretty incredible.
So I guess my leadership approach has always been based on a number of things, but there's a famous quote by Maya Angelou, which is really where I try and base how I do this, which is people won't remember what you say, they won't remember what you do, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. And I think if we have that in the back of our mind in everything that we do, you'll plan differently, you'll strategize differently, you'll actually think about the people behind the process before you actually do the strategy and the plan. So I think for me, that's just a powerful quote that makes a big difference.
I guess I'll leave with a quote too, that connection is our biological imperative, and that we need connection just as much as we need anything else. And that building strong connection in the workplace, safe connection in the workplace, is how we thrive. And if you're feeling disconnected, like what Jamie said, reach out for help, that we all need help. Even in our professional worlds, in all of our, the roles that we play, there's a period when we also become the person that needs the help, and when we offer the help, and that it is reciprocated. So yeah, again, connection is our biological imperative. Any way you can build connection in your community, reach out to safe people, you're going to start to thrive more. And yeah, that's it.
Wonderful insights. Thank you so much. This has been such an incredible discussion. If you have been watching or you watch the replay, please connect to each other as you're chatting in the comments, connect to these panelists and me. We are all here to build connection, and the best way to get support is to ask for support and build your community. Have a wonderful day, and thanks so much for being here.